welcome to another edition of the Seven Sisters. As always, I'm Ethereal Adam, and this is episode 4, Atheists Dismay. Now, if you're new to the show, you really should watch the episodes in order. This is episode 4, so you should watch 1, 2, and 3. In episode 1, I start out by showing you a UFO that buzzes the tail of a commercial airplane on March 26, 2013. In episode 3, the last video I showed you I recorded on September 7th, 2013, establishing that I had a 6-month ongoing relationship where the UFOs would continually return to the skies above my house, above my neighborhood, and allow me to record extraordinary things that they do. By doing so, I have taught you 6 characteristics that the Foo Fighters display. So now I have made a group of unidentified flying objects identifiable. I've never heard of anyone doing this before. The next video that I'm going to show you, I recorded on September 13th, 2013, which was Friday the 13th. Let's take a look. Alright, this is the police helicopter flying over my neighborhood from the north to the south or from the right to the left. It's shining down an infrared beam. At the bottom of the beam in the left corner you see an orb right there. Infrared beams illuminate night vision, so these police officers are running night vision. Infrared illuminates night vision as if you were shining a bright light, but people don't notice the IR beam. This helicopter is going to be made a fool of by an orb, or maybe more than one orb, and I'm going to show it to you. I'm in my backyard. You'll see the roof line of my house. I'm facing the west. There's an orb above it. It's kind of faint, but it's above it. That's the roof line of my house. There's an orb down and to the right. The illuminated part of the helicopter is the cockpit, so the tail is up and to the right, and the tail has a light on it. You'll see flash when it resumes motion, so you know that that orb was definitely under that helicopter. There's an orb at the bottom of the screen. Looks like it's shooting up. I believe I put this in 5% slow motion, so these orbs are moving very, very fast. There's an orb at the top of the screen, at the top of the frame there above the helicopter. It's going to go down. Now it's under the helicopter. Now it's at the bottom of the frame. That's how fast that orb is moving. That is an air vent on top of my roof. There's a tree in my front yard. There's another air vent right there. And the pilots of the helicopter probably did not notice the orb whatsoever. And that's my neighbor's house on the left, and it's gone. Let's take a look at that video again with the original soundtrack. Also, a fun project would be to look for this video as a single on my channel so that you could use a movie software like iMovie to slow it down and see if you could find some orbs that I missed.
It's Friday the 13th, and that is a police helicopter.
Look at the bottom of the screen. This is an orb that keeps blinking in and out.
There's one. So it's flashing its light every so often. I'm not getting it.
This is 2% slow motion. Look at the center of the screen. This is 35% slow motion. This is regular speed. Here's an orb that pops in and out under a helicopter on September 17th, 2013. Did you see that? Let's watch that again and we'll freeze the frame. There it is right there. All right, let's take a look at that again in 10% slow motion. So the last videos that I just showed you were from September 17th, 2013, and I just showed you two separate examples of orbs appearing around helicopters on that night. Now, around this time, I would leave my house around the time of September 2013, October 2013. I would leave my house at night and I would go to different destinations. When I would arrive at a destination, I would get out of my car and I would look up in the sky and I would see a Foo Fighter in the sky above me, hovering, had the appearance as a ball of light, and I would see it there for 3 or 4 seconds and then it would disappear. And this would happen at every destination that I would go to at nighttime. And therefore the intelligence that was controlling the Foo Fighters that I talk about in episode 3 was letting me know that they were following me around. And I was okay with this because I'm interacting with something extraordinary. Now, one night around this time, I had left my house, I had left my kitchen light on, and it was nighttime. I was driving around the city, and when I returned home, I entered my garage with my garage door opener. I pulled the car in, and then I got out of the car. I opened the wooden door that leads from my garage into my kitchen, and when I swung the door open, there, head high, about 6 foot in the air, was a yellow orb hovering in the middle of my kitchen. It was the size of a softball, and it was only there for a split second, let's say 0.5 seconds. And it shrunk itself down into nothing and disappeared. Now, it was there long enough for me to see it, but short enough for me to question if it was really there. Looking back on the experience, it was there. I saw it. And according to the psychology of skepticism, extraordinary claims require extraordinary proof. I do not have a video of the orb in my house, and therefore, as a viewer, you are supposed to say that it's a compelling story, but you can't accept it because I didn't show you any proof of it. And I encourage you to do so, but I get to know it was there. So it is a fact that I did see that. And so now I have to question, what was it doing in my house? As a skeptic, I don't like to speculate, but I'm going to have to speculate a little bit on this one. Basically, it seems to me that the intelligence that's controlling the Foo Fighters is extraterrestrial. I give lots of good reasons why in my last episode, the Foo Fighters, episode 3. So therefore, it seems to me that the orb was some sort of an extraterrestrial recording device that was flying around in my house documenting the contents of my house. That's my general feeling. And of course, that's an opinion. I can't prove that. I can't even prove that it was in there, but I get to know it was in there. So, on September 17th, 2013, I recorded a lot of videos that night. The next video that I'm going to show you, I labeled a star, but we're going to look at it real close and we're going to see that it's not a star, it's a fake star. So let's take a look at this one. Once again, this is September 17th, 2013, the same day that I showed you the orbs flying around the helicopters. This is light yellow right here. It's an object hovering. This is in the western part of the sky. Now it's white. Now it's red at the bottom. Dark green. Dark green again. Now it's orange. Now it's baby blue. Now it's white with a red ring around it. That's green again. I think I saw an orb pop in and out right there, so you might want to slow that down and watch for orbs. Now it's white with an orange ring around it. Now it's dark blue. Okay, so astronomers look at stars. Stars that are blue are typically hotter. They're UV, they're about 40,000 degrees Kelvin. Red stars that astronomers see are typically about 10,000 degrees Kelvin, so they're much cooler. Yellow stars are about 6,000 degrees Kelvin. Now, the human eye cannot see green or purple emitted from stars, so the fact that you saw a dark green color coming from this object means that it cannot be a star. This, I suspect, is some type of a spaceship hovering in the air. What else could it be? The oldest civilization of people that we know of that had a developed writing system were the Sumerians. They were from southern Mesopotamia, which is modern-day Iraq, and they popped up around 4000 BCE. Now, the Egyptians and the Jews both popped up around 4000 BCE. In fact, the Jewish calendar starts out at 3761 BCE, but it was the Sumerians that had a writing system first. Now, they wrote on cylinder seals, which was wet clay. When the clay would harden, they would have a stone-like cylinder that would last for thousands of years. They also did it with pictures, too. They were called pictographs, where they would roll out an impression of a picture, and when it hardened, they had a lasting picture for thousands of years. About 2000 BCE, the Sumerians wrote a story called the Epic of Gilgamesh. And most Sumerian scholars agree that it's a fable about a real king named Gilgamesh who was king of Urk, which was in southern Mesopotamia at the time. And in the fable, he goes down into the underworld in search of eternal life because he has a good friend that's dying. And on his adventures, he comes across a man named Ziusudra. And Ziusudra was given a task to build a giant ark and to take 2 of every animal on the ark to prepare for an upcoming great flood. You might recognize this story as the story of Noah's Ark. The interesting thing here is that biblical scholars tend to agree that Moses wrote the Torah during the time that the Jews were in the wilderness between 1440 BCE and 1400 BCE. That was about 560 years after the Sumerians wrote that story. So it's very interesting to see how the Sumerians and the Egyptians and the Jews all shared information with the governments. They all had kings or pharaohs, and they would send messages back and forth and tell each other about their culture, their fables, their religion, and so on and so forth. So this man, Zecharia Sitchin, is an American author who was born in Baku, Azerbaijan. And he is credited with being able to read Old Hebrew text and translate cuneiform script. He says that when he translates the Sumerian writings, that they're literal, and that they tell a story about a 10th planet in our solar system called Nibiru, or Planet X. It has a very large elliptical orbit, and that it passes near Earth about every 3,600 years. Now, of course, he wrote a book called The 10th Planet, and it was written before the Board of Astronomers decided to demote Pluto. Pluto used to be considered a planet and is now called a dwarf planet, and their reasoning was because they found asteroids that were similar in size, so they didn't feel comfortable calling it a planet. But nevertheless, you get the idea. It's the 10th planet, or now the 9th planet. So, you should keep in mind that there are a bunch of Sumerian scholars that say that Zecharia Sitchin did not correctly translate the cuneiform. There's even some people that have made websites devoted to debunking him and discrediting him. So you should keep that in mind. But in this next photo I show you, I'm going to show you Zecharia Sitchin holding a cylinder seal that's been blown up very large, and you're going to see that in the upper left-hand corner, the Sumerians depict our solar system. And they show the sun in the middle, and they show the planets orbiting around it. And there are 10. They also got the correct size of the planets. And if you listen to Sitchin's lecture, he talks about how when they give the order of the planets, they don't give the order from the sun out as Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, and so on. They give the order of the planets from out in, from Pluto to Neptune to Uranus, so on and so forth, as if a visitor came into our solar system and recorded the planets.
Flying into the tree, moving. I find that interesting.
So all the Jewish writings together are broken into 3 different groups: the Torah, Nevi'im prophets, and Ketuvim writings. Around 58 CE, the Christians popped up, give or take a couple decades, and they said, we're going to take all of the Jewish writings and we're going to put it in a binder, and we're going to call it the Old Testament. Then we're going to add the New Testament and put it in the same binder, and that's going to be our Bible. About 300 CE, with Constantine, a council came together and said, we're going to take all of the Jewish writings, but we have seven other books that we like: First Maccabees, Second Maccabees, Tobit, Judith, Wisdom of Solomon, Sirach, and Barak, and we're going to put those books in with the other Jewish writings, and we're going to call that our Old Testament. And then we're going to add the New Testament, the same one that the Christians have, and we're going to call ourselves Catholics. So then, about 600 CE, Mohammed was in the land, and he was illiterate. He said that the Archangel Gabriel would come to him in his cave and talk to him, and he said Gabriel told him that the Torah had been corrupted by the hands of men over time. And Gabriel would verbally tell him the corrections to make. Mohammed would memorize them, and then he would tell his followers. So in 632 CE, Mohammed passed away, and his son-in-law, Uthman ibn Affan, published the Quran between 635 CE and 638 CE, and during that time there were multiple versions of the Quran in circulation that were slightly different until about 638 when they settled on one. So when we look at the Jews, the Christians, the Catholics, and the Muslims, we see that they all are worshiping the same God. They're worshiping the God that created Adam and Eve, and they all call him by a different name because they speak different languages. So if I was to ask a Jew, a Christian, a Catholic, or a Muslim, is God an extraterrestrial being? Well, they would have to say yes, unless they don't agree with their own creation story. You see, God created the heavens and the earth, and he created Adam and Eve in his own image. In order to create the earth, he would have to be outside of the earth. And the definition of an extraterrestrial is coming from outside the confinements of our planet. Also, when you ask most Jews, Christians, Catholics, and Muslims, where is God? Where does he live? They will tell you, in heaven. And they will look up to the sky. So heaven is the sky and anything above the sky, which is outer space. So now I'd like to show you the second book of the Torah, which is the book of Exodus. And I'm going to use nothing but facts and show you factual information within the book of Exodus. So for the atheists that might say that the Bible is a bunch of nonsense and there's no reason to look at it, you actually should watch this part because I'm going to go into factual information. So this is Exodus chapter 3, verses 1 to 6. Feel free to get out a Bible and follow along with me. We're going to look at this book as if a man wrote it between 1440 BCE and 500 BCE. Now, biblical scholars say that the Torah was written between 1440 and 1400 BCE, and that's what I believe, and I believe Moses wrote it. But if you look at Wikipedia right now, it says that the Torah was written around 1310 BCE, which is only 130 years later. But there's also some people that I've heard over the years say that they think it was written as late as 500, and I don't know if they're confusing the entire Bible, Old Testament Bible, with the Torah, or why they think that it was written as late as 500. But just for the sake of argument, if we can agree that a man wrote it between 1440 BCE and 500 BCE, those are facts, and I'm going to stick to the facts. So whoever wrote the story talks about 5 extraordinary things that should not have been realized at that time. Germs, a self-awareness that his people needed 10 laws to live by, accurately describing the different ways UFOs look in the daytime and the nighttime, radiation exposure, and God having a face that he doesn't allow anyone to see, and back parts that he does. So in Exodus chapter 3, verses 1 to 6, Moses sees a burning bush in the desert. And says that an angel comes out of the burning bush. Moses says that when he noticed that the bush was not consumed by the fire, he started to go investigate why the bush is not burnt. And God stopped him by calling out to him from within the burning bush. Now, why would God be in a burning bush in the desert? That doesn't really make any sense. So, let us take a look at a UFO video that I recorded on September 18th, 2014. Let's check it out. Here's a UFO that I recorded flying over the south side of Oklahoma City in the evening on September 18th, 2014. Notice that it looks like a fireball. Imagine if this UFO landed in the desert some 3,420 years ago when Moses was in the desert. How would Moses have described it? Like a burning bush, perhaps. Between 1440 BCE and 500 BCE, bicycles, cars, motorboats, airplanes, rocket ships, and spaceships were not perceived, neither was electricity. So Moses would not have the word spaceship in his vocabulary. He also would refer to light as fire. Therefore, quite possibly what Moses is describing here is a spaceship that has landed in the desert. So we last left off in chapter 3 of Exodus. We were looking at verses 1 through 6. And in there, after that, it says that God tells Moses he is the father of Moses' father, and he's the father of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and that he has come down from heaven to set his people free from the Egyptian Pharaoh. He instructs Moses to go to the Pharaoh and tell him to set the children of Israel free. Now, heaven is basically the sky and anything above the sky. So God is telling Moses that he came down from outer space to manipulate things to set the children of Israel free. That's literally what he's saying. And saying that he is the father of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, well, being the father, that denotes DNA. So now let's take a look at Exodus 13. So that's Exodus chapter 13, verse 21. So in Exodus 13, verse 21, the children of Israel are running from the Pharaoh led by Moses and are following God, who is flying through the sky. And it's written here that in the daytime, he looks like he is in a pillar of a cloud. And in the nighttime, he is in a pillar of fire. What's interesting about this is that accurately describes UFOs that we see today. There's a man, he's a fighter pilot, flies F-18s. I believe he's retired now. His name is David Fravor. And he tells a story about chasing a tic-tac shaped UFO that was 40 foot wide over the eastern coast while he was doing training exercises for the Navy. He's on the Lex Friedman show, and on YouTube it's under the Tic Tac UFO story with David Fravor and Lex Friedman. He's also in the Unidentified series that Luis Elizondo put out, where they show the video and they talk about it. Exodus 19, verses 10 to 15, talk about germs and the penalty of death if the children of Israel try to come near God without washing themselves. Moses tells the people to wash themselves and their clothes because in 3 days God will come down in the sight of all the people upon Mount Sinai. And if anyone tries to go up the mountain to look at God, they shall be put to death. In verse 15, Moses tells the people to come not at your wives, which means do not have sex with them. It becomes clear that God doesn't want their germs near him. Antony von Leeuwenhoek discovered germs, or bacteria, in 1676 CE. He used a single lens microscope to view bacteria. The link between germs and illness came in the mid-1800s CE through the work of Louis Pasteur, who was born December 27, 1822 CE. Therefore, germs were not discovered and understood until about 3,000 years after the book of Exodus was written. Exodus 19:18 says, "And Mount Sinai was altogether on a smoke, because the Lord descended upon it in fire. And the smoke thereof ascended as the smoke of a furnace. And the whole mount quaked greatly." This is the author of this story 3,400 years ago describing a spaceship landing on Mount Sinai. So in Exodus 24:12, God tells Moses to come up the mountain, and he will give Moses tablets of stone and a law and commandments which he has written to teach the children of Israel. This shows that the author that wrote this story had a self-awareness that knew that his people needed 10 commandments to live by so that they would thrive and not die off. In Exodus 33, verses 9 to 17, it says that God was in a cloudy pillar, and the cloudy pillar descended and stood at the door of the tabernacle. And the Lord talked with Moses. Moses realizes that God is inside of something that can fly. And in verse 18, Moses said, I beseech thee, show me thy glory. You see, Moses is asking God to show himself to him, to show him his face, because he realizes that God is inside of something that can fly. And in verses 19 to 23, God says, no man shall see my face and live. But tomorrow Moses can go up high on a mountain, and God will pass by, allowing Moses to see his back parts. Then, in Exodus 34, verse 29 and 30, it says that when Moses came down from Mount Sinai, after seeing God's back parts, the skin of his face shone, and Aaron, his brother, and the children of Israel were afraid to come near him. Moses' face had apparently been burned by the radiation of God's spaceship. On December 29th, 1980, in the evening, Betty Cash, Vicki Landrum, and Colby Landrum, Vicki's 7-year-old grandson, were driving home to Dayton, Texas. They saw a diamond-shaped UFO, so Betty pulled her Oldsmobile Cutlass to the side of the road and the women got out of the car. Later, the women were hospitalized for radiation burns. This came to be known as the Cash-Landrum incident. So, there is no way that a man that lived between 1440 BCE and 500 BCE made up the book of Exodus as a fictional story. And here's why. There are 5 things that are talked about that should not have been realized and put in one little story at that time. Number 1 is Moses accurately describes the different ways that UFOs look in the daytime and the nighttime. He starts out by saying that he was in the desert and he came across a burning bush. Well, this is simple why he's calling it a burning bush. Moses did not have a word in his vocabulary for airplane because they hadn't been invented. That was invented in 1903 CE. He did not have a word for spaceship. And what he's seeing is a spaceship that has landed, and here's why. He says that he sees an angel come out of the burning bush. Well, Moses didn't understand electricity. To him, if he wanted light, he had to make fire. So fire equals light. So he's calling this a burning bush because it must be fire. The clue here is when Moses says that when he noticed that the bush was not consumed by the fire, he moved in closer to investigate. And that's when God called out to him from within the burning bush and says, stop, don't come any closer. And that's because God didn't want Moses to be harmed by the radiation that spaceships put off. Also, we have hundreds of thousands of UFO pictures, videos. I showed you one where it looks like a white pillar in the sky. And later in the story, when they're at Mount Sinai, Moses says that God was going to lead them to the land of milk and honey. And Moses says that the children of Israel were walking on the ground and they are following God, who is flying through the sky. And in the daytime, he looks like he's within a cloudy pillar. And at nighttime, he looks like he's in a pillar of fire. We've got pictures of this today. So one of the things that I run into sometimes whenever I show people my UFO videos is they'll tell me that I don't know what they are. They're unidentified flying objects. They'll say that could be a top secret military craft from our military, or it could be a military craft from other countries. And this is something that Luis Elizondo ran into with his Unidentified series, where he has a few videos that were captured by F-18 Navy pilots as they were doing training exercises over the Pacific Ocean. And one thing that he can't get away from is people saying, oh, well, then that must be enemy craft from another country that's watching how we do our training exercises. And Luis just can't get away from that thought. Well, Moses did it for us. You see, back in Moses' time, there was no airplanes. There was nothing that could fly that was man-made. So this could not be enemy craft from another country. It most likely would have to be extraterrestrials that are flying through the sky. So now we're going to move on to germs. And this is the most profound of the 5 reasons. Moses says that the deity God commands him to tell all the children of Israel to wash their clothes and wash themselves, because in 3 days he's going to come close to everyone and let them get a look. And he says, he so strongly believes this and so adamant about this that he says, anybody that tries to come near me without washing themselves, I'm going to kill. He says, I'm going to kill you. And in some versions of the Bible, he says I'm going to kill you as if shooting you through with a projectile. Okay, so it's clear that Moses does not understand that God is talking about germs. Moses never says the word germs because he doesn't have a word for that. And that right there is really the proof that nobody made this story up, because they're talking about germs. Now, Antoni von Leeuwenhoek first looked at bacteria with a single lens microscope in 1676 CE. Okay, Moses wrote this story 3,116 years before that happened. And when Antoni looked at the bacteria, he did not understand a connection between germs and sickness in 1676 CE, 3,100 years later. So if this story had been written in 1576 CE, then okay, we could say, well, just because Antoni got credit for it doesn't mean other people were thinking about germs at the time. But no, it was written 3,116 years before. That is extraordinary proof. Number 3 is a self-awareness that his people needed 10 laws to live by so they didn't die off. This is the weakest of the 5. Sure, the pharaohs were making up laws, so an author could have made this up and said, well, I'm going to say that my people are getting 10 laws to live by. But let's look at the 10 Commandments. They're known all over the world. Pretty much everyone has heard of the 10 Commandments. And at one time, Moses slammed them down. They were made out of stone, and he broke them into hundreds of pieces out of anger. Well, God wanted Moses to have the 10 Commandments so badly that he made him another set, and Moses had to go back up and get 10 more. And the 10 Commandments really did keep the Jews from dying off. Thou shalt not kill. I mean, the 10 Commandments is really a way of ensuring the survival of the Jews. Number 4 is God has a face that he doesn't allow anyone to see and back parts that he does. Okay, so I have asked over 100 people, what is the proof that there are extraterrestrials? What would that be if someone could prove it to you? And the number 1 answer I get is seeing one. And it just so happens that 3,400 years ago, Moses realizes that God is inside of something that can fly, and he asks him to show himself to him. He says, show me thy glory. Well, God's response to that was, no man shall see my face and live. Okay, so why haven't we seen aliens? Why don't they just fly on down, land, and show themselves to us? Well, how would that benefit an alien? If there are aliens, I'm not stating as a fact that there is, because I have to prove it, but if there are aliens, how would it benefit them to land and get out of their spaceship and show themselves? Well, it really wouldn't, would it? They'd actually be putting themselves in danger for no benefit to them. It would actually benefit us, but not them. So there's really no question as to why they wouldn't do that. It's pretty obvious. So then there's number 5, which is radiation exposure. Right after God tells Moses that no man shall see his face and live, he says, but you can go high up on a mountain, Moses, tomorrow, and I will pass by and I'll let you see my back parts. Well, Moses goes up the mountain, God passes by in his spaceship, and whenever Moses comes down the mountain, it says his face shone. You see, Moses' face had been burnt by the radiation of God's spaceship because he got a little too close to him. And for the people that might want to argue that that's not real, I showed you the Cash Landrum incident, a real documented newspaper clipping from December 29th, 1980, that an older woman and her daughter went to the hospital, and it was the hospital that said that they had radiation burns. And their story was that they saw a diamond-shaped UFO and got out of their car, and I guess it got too close to them.
All right, it's September 23rd. It's approximately 8 o'clock p.m. The sun is starting to set. You can see the sky, and the sun's going down. There's some clouds. And if I look up here and zoom in, you can see a UFO down and to the right moving. Up and to the left, that's a star. Down and to the right, that right there is a UFO. And it's moving. Ever so slowly. Up and to the right, you'll see something else moving. They like to play. Then, over here, you have this airplane. It's moving by. And then, straight up, you have that, which looks like a star, but it is not a star.
So there's really 2 different versions of God. One version is that God is an omnipotent spirit. And here in America, that's very popular among the Christians that we have here. It's a national belief that most Christians agree on. And the word omnipotent, the definition, says of a deity having absolute power, being able to do anything. But it does not contain anything about a spirit. We have to be careful when we look at God as an omnipotent spirit that we don't confuse that with gravity. Gravity is what holds the planets in place, and on an atomic level, gravity is what holds electrons in place around the nucleus of an atom. The other version of God is the one in the Old Testament of the Bible, and it's not an omnipotent spirit. It's the physical God that has a face and has, according to Exodus, hind parts, and also, according to Genesis, legs. Because in the book of Genesis, when Adam and Eve had eaten of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, they hid themselves among fig leaves. Well, Genesis says that God was walking through the Garden of Eden in the cool of the day. It doesn't say that he was hovering or floating or flying. He was walking. And then once he realized what Adam and Eve had done, he consulted his peers. And he said, what are we going to do about this? And after they talked about it, they decided to expel Adam and Eve from the Garden of Eden. Later in the book of Genesis, it says that God made clothing for Adam and Eve out of animal skins. Well, omnipotent spirits that are flowing through the universe, that are sources of intelligent energy, they wouldn't be walking through the Garden of Eden. They wouldn't have legs, they wouldn't have a face, and they wouldn't make clothing out of animal skins. And that's not what the Old Testament tells you in any place, that God is an omnipotent spirit. So where does the idea that God is an omnipotent spirit come from? Well, the Puritans began to come over here to America after 1611, when King James had translated the scriptures into the King James Version of the Bible. Between that time and now, people have been reading the Bible, trying to make sense of what is God. And remember, airplanes weren't invented until 1903, so for all those hundreds of years, nobody was thinking about flying machines, airplanes, or anything like that. And the best thing that they could come up with, the best idea of understanding God, was to say that he's an omnipotent spirit. So now I'll mention briefly the book of Ezekiel. In the book of Ezekiel, he was down by the river of Kabar in the time of King Jehoiachin's captivity. And that was between 600 BCE and 584 BCE. And I know that because I went to the library and I looked up King Jehoiachin. And I found that he was in prison for about 14 years, from 600 BCE down to about 584. And I was searching for a reason as to why the Old Testament doesn't have the first and last names of the author and the date on it clearly, so that we could understand it. And I thought maybe it was a deception. It was written in a deceptive way on purpose to deceive us. And what I found out is that that's not true at all. The people just did not know how to date time. They used a method called regnal dating. And what that is when a significant event would happen, they would mention what king was in power at the time to keep track of the date. It was in 45 BCE that Julius Caesar saw the confusion among the different countries of the world and how all the different dates didn't match up, and so he established the Julian calendar. And that worked out great for a while, but it didn't account for leap year. So every 4 years it would become more inaccurate until finally it was grossly inaccurate, and we adopted the Gregorian calendar in 1582 CE, which did account for the leap year. So humans have only been able to accurately date time now for about 438 years. So going back to the book of Ezekiel, it is his account of being abducted by aliens. It is very specific. He says that a spaceship came down from outer space and landed. Now, he didn't use that terminology, but that's what he's saying. And he said that it looked like a wheel within a wheel. And once it lands, he describes the different alien beings that came out of it and what they look like. And then he says he looked inside of the spaceship, and I believe he says the craft or the work of God is what he calls the spaceship. He says he looked inside of it, and he saw the likeness of a man sitting on a throne. And there again, I'll remind you that in the book of Genesis, it said that God created man in his own image. And here we have Ezekiel saying he sees the likeness of a man sitting on a throne. Eventually, they take him against his will into the spaceship, and they take him up in the air. And like always, God instills a message in Ezekiel, like God instills a message in all of the prophets he chooses. He says, go back and tell the people these things, and drops Ezekiel back off. So then we look at the book of Job. And in the book of Job, Job is in his house with some of his friends, and they're being very arrogant, and they're talking as if they know everything. And there's a saying, nobody likes a know-it-all. So God comes out of a whirlwind, and I picture a spaceship coming out of a tornado or something like that in the desert, and he moves close to Job and he begins talking to Job. And he says, oh, okay, well, you think you're so smart. Do you know how to provide food for the offspring of the woolly mammoth? Do you know how to stop the tides of the oceans from flooding the planet, which is gravity? He says, did you know that by loosing the bands of Orion and binding the bands of the Pleiades, that you could basically put the world in an ice age, is my interpretation of that. But no matter how you interpret that, it's a fact that the deity God that's speaking to Job in the book is talking about science. He's talking about gravity. He's talking about star constellations. And he's chastising Job for being arrogant. So we see the God as an extraterrestrial being in a spaceship. And the more I look at the Old Testament, the more I see that God is a civilization of extraterrestrial beings that have created us in their image. When earlier I talked about Zecharia Sitchin, I explained that when he translates the cuneiform script, that he says that a group of extraterrestrials known as the Anunnaki came to our planet and spliced their DNA with Homo erectus, creating us. Well, when you go back and you look at Darwinism, you see, Darwin didn't say that humans evolved from gorillas. He said that humans evolved from a common ancestor of the chimpanzee. And that common ancestor has not been found. The bones of that animal or that ancestor have not been dug up. So when you plug in Zecharia Sitchin's theory and you look at the Bible, and you say, well, what if aliens did splice their DNA and create us? That would account for the missing link and why we're never going to find it. And it plugs right in, and what it really means is that both Darwinism and the Bible are both a little bit right. Neither one of them are completely wrong. And this is what I see. It makes the most sense whenever I examine everything I know, my ongoing relationship with the Foo Fighters, and my studies in the Holy Bible.
Here we are. Oops. Man, that thing is really moving. There's a house in the way. There's the house. All right, I got it. It's October 20 something, and that is way up there. This is the first one that I've captured with my tripod. The tree is obstructing it. Try to move over. Please. Come on, please, please, please. Can it be like that? There we go. There we go. Okay, it's November 1st. It starts getting dark now at 7:15 or 7:20. I have seen 3 UFOs tonight in different parts of the sky and was unable to get them. So I'm very angry, but now I'm happy because I got this one with my tripod, and it's not very high in the sky. In fact, if you rewind the tape, you'll see I focused on the house first. Notice the light getting dimmer and brighter. Notice that it seems that the whole vehicle is light that gets dimmer and brighter, and not that it has a flashing light. Zooming in a little bit there. Okay. It disappeared. It's November 2nd, and I was pulling up in the driveway and looked up and saw it, and I'm not using the tripod, of course. The tripod, and it just disappeared on us.
So, if I really am right, and God and the angels are actually extraterrestrials flying around in spaceships, what does that make the devil and the demons? Well, the devil and the demons would also be extraterrestrials that can fly around in spaceships. So if you happen to see a spaceship near you, think twice before running up to it calling out the name of God, because you never know. That one might be a demon. Well, that's all the time we have for this episode. But remember, as always, if I didn't have the videos, I wouldn't tell you about it.